My first biological baby was born at 29 weeks. He came into the world crying, weighing a mere 3 pounds, but still able to let out a lusty scream before being whisked off to the NICU. He isn't supposed to be able to do that, my midwife told me confidently. My first view of him was a cell phone picture my husband managed to snag while the baby was in transit, with 4 nurses and a doctor surrounding the crib as they checked over his tiny body and hooked him up to machines. I lay in the bed in shock, watching their backs as they worked. A flurry of frenetic activity filled my tiny room, then, silence. He was gone. Did I really just have a baby, or was it some kind of painful dream? The rest of the night and the next day, I let my husband wheel me into the NICU every few hours for visits, where I watched someone else change our son's diaper. I was helpless, useless. I couldn't care for him, not yet anyway. He was so tiny, so fragile. He was strong and doing well for a 29-weeker, but his connection to this world seemed tenuous at best. There was one thing I could do, and one thing only: make milk. I didn't know the first thing about nursing or pumping. I thought there was lots of time left to learn before the baby came. Clearly, I was mistaken. A nurse came to give me a crash course into machine, and I went to work a few hours after giving birth. After I left the hospital, leaving him behind, I struggled to find a balance between our 4 children at home and our baby. I was being pulled in so many directions, I didn't know which way was up. Do the next thing became my refrain. I created a manageable schedule, visiting the hospital for 3 hours in the morning and a few hours each evening, after the other kids were in bed too, but still there never seemed to be enough time in the day to do anything well. My days were a fog. I wanted to just be in the hospital to be near him, but I couldn't do anything to help him. I felt lazy, sitting next to his isolette accomplished nothing, but I couldn't pull myself away from my restless vigil. I could hold him 2 hours a day. I only missed my 2 hours on one day when I had a cold. It was devastating. So many people stepped in to help us. Some watched our older kids in the evenings so my husband and I could go to the hospital together. They brought us dinner or watched our kids Saturday mornings. Some even helped us by running to the grocery store, no small task when shopping for a family of 6. Finally, 10 long weeks after being born, my son was ready to come home. Elated doesn't even come close to describing how it felt to have him home, to have a baby with no cords attached. To hold him in my arms without asking permission or having the feeling of someone looking over my shoulder was pure bliss. The thing was, it didn't get easier. I had been waking up every night for 11 weeks to pump at least twice while he was in the hospital, so I was already used to not sleeping through the night. Being up with the baby was different. He never wanted to be put down. Ever. He wasn't a machine that I could turn off after 20 minutes and go straight back to bed. He was awake for however long he needed to be awake. During the day, he was strapped to me constantly. He refused to sleep if his body wasn't touching mine. It's understandable. After all, he was just a baby. Instead of spending the last 10 weeks being rocked in the womb as I moved throughout my day, being lulled by the sound of my heartbeat and the hum of quiet voices, he had been alone in a still and quiet isolette. I was grateful, I really was. I love all my children deeply, and knowing how near I came to losing this baby made him all the dearer to me. But if it was so great to have him home, if this was how it should have been all along, why was it so hard? I never allowed myself to admit that the balancing act one had been doing for 10 weeks had been excruciating. All I could see was what others were doing for me. All I could do was berate myself for needing and accepting so much help from others. Why couldn't I pull myself together? Why couldn't I just do it better, do more, be more independent? The first mistake I made as the parent of a newborn was not being kind to myself. I didn't even allow myself to feel anything, to feel the trauma and the loss or mourn a normal pregnancy and normal birth, and a normal first few months of life. 4 years later, writing about the experience, tears flooded my eyes and I cried at my desk. I cried for the person I thought I had to be, and for the person who had walked through those months feeling so alone and yet surrounded by people who would have understood if only I had been brave enough to talk about it. There's only one you, but you don't have to do it all. You don't have to act like the superhero of this story, because you already are. No one can do what you do, and no matter what you're going through, someone has been there and will understand. Don't be afraid of appearing weak. Someone who has been through all that you've been through could never be weak. Talk about it, and know that your value is not in what you can do, but in who you are. It's a lesson I'm still learning, but one that is well worth the long journey to discover.